Well, good morning to everyone that's on with us on our first soil health webinar for 2022. I'm Tony Nye, the Clinton County educator for Ag and Natural Resources. And our topic today is, what's your soil health resolution? And with us today is Aaron Heilers from Darke County, Jason Sneed from Clinton County, and Jack Summers from Champaign County. Three producers that have different aspects to soil health, and we will be utilizing them to have a discussion this morning as a farmer panel discussion. And Taylor Dill and myself are your moderators for today. So with that, I'm going to start. Jason, since you're from my county, I'll start with you. Give us a little background and some of the soil health practices that you're trying to incorporate into your operation.
But as Tony said, I farm here in Clinton County. Farm a little bit, right around 500 acres. Cover crop, no-till. Been that way for a while now. As far as soil health goes and what I do, intensely cover crop, like I said, 100% no-till. On the cover crop side, it's heavy on the rye, but I'm getting more and more mixes into the things as we go. Getting a little more comfortable with doing more mixes as well, which is definitely improving things. I'm 100% corn, soybean. I actually don't raise wheat, which is probably a bad thing in the soil health world, but some of the soils that I farm are extremely wet. And so we have trouble getting wheat into the rotation. But that's where we use a cover crop to kind of break up that.
Okay, thank you. Aaron, we'll go with you next.
Thanks, Tony. And just to correct you, I'm from Shelby County, not Darke County. So,
okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. Got to represent Shelby County. I've been farming for about 10 years now, and started out 100% no-till from day one. So corn and bean rotation predominantly, have some wheat in the rotation, but similar to Jason, had some wet farm issues and not so great years of wheat. So it kind of comes and goes, but definitely like to add cover crops if we have wheat in the rotation. I've been using a lot of cereal rye lately just because it's easy for us. We farm about 300 acres now, my wife and I, and then my brother-in-law has about another 500 acres. So it's just the two of us. So time is a challenge for us, but 100% no-till and cover crops is kind of my soil health story.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Jack?
Well, we farm in the Mad River Valley, just northwest of Urbana, about 700 acres total. 500 in the valley, and another 200 acres over east of us, about 12 miles, that I call the mountain farm. It's on the high ridge that the Ohio High Point is in, and it's a whole lot different than we are in kind of the flatlands of the valley. We've been no-tilling 100% since 1995. Had been no-tilling actually back in the 80s to get started with it. Started trying to use some cover crops in 2012. And converted to 100% cover crops in 16. And we've been kind of experimenting with a lot of different things over that time. We use some mixes, mostly a rye wheat combination after our major crops. And in addition, we got some livestock. We've got 100 head of Berkshire sows here that we have a little manure that we apply as well.
Okay. So with that, gentlemen, what is your soil health resolution for 22? Aaron, we'll start with you. Is there anything you're really wanting to get accomplished this coming year?
My big goal is to get more cover crops out after our regular cash crop. We, as I've mentioned earlier, the operation has kind of grown over the last couple of years with different family dynamics. And it's harder and harder to get cover crops out when there's just maybe 2 or 3 of you doing the harvesting and hauling and everything else that needs done. So this year I didn't get enough out to make me happy. And so I purchased a new toolbar to be able to get out on the ground more efficiently. So that's what I'm going to be working on, is fine tuning that. Hopefully it works. And, it's a tool that, whether it's me running it quicker, or if I can have one of my kids hop in it, it's a little less, mechanical. It's just get the seed in the ground. That's what I'm going to be working on.
Okay. Thank you. Jason, we'll go with you next on what your goals are, resolution for 22.
Well, I think I'm going to be repeating a lot of what Aaron said. I wasn't really pleased with the amount of acres I got out this year either. So, definitely trying to get back to being as close to 100% covered as I can. And maybe trying some new things again. Last year I had some crimson clover thrown in that I hadn't tried in the past. I was a little nervous about it, but it actually worked out really well. Unfortunately, this year I didn't get that crimson clover back on some acres. So I don't have the exact same setup that I would like to have tried again. So yeah, trying to get more, get back closer to that 100% cover like I was 2 years ago. So.
Okay, Jack, same question.
Well, our resolution is to try to get better and better at what we're trying to accomplish with cover crops. We've got several issues that we need to work on. One of them is a little bit referred to. Our timing hasn't been quite as good on getting our seeding done as it should be. So that's something we need to get accomplished this year. Something new we want to try to do is to get some legume incorporated in after our soybeans to help next year's corn, in addition to the nitrogen produced by soybeans. So we're trying to work on that, figure out how we might be able to get that done. We're actually doing some pretty good stuff. We've got about 120 acres of small grains, including some rye. So we do some seeding after that. It does a pretty good job of replacing some nitrogen. And the third thing that we want to work on a little bit more, we started planting green intentionally the first time last year. We did it by accident a few times prior to that because we had to. But we need to do some refinement on how we're going to do our crop termination, and a little bit about how we're handling nutrients and things like that.
Okay. All right. So Jason or Aaron, are either of you planting green at all at this point?
Yeah, we've always. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aaron.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I've been planting green probably 3 years now. So I typically get cereal rye out after soybeans and then plant the corn into that. And I know that's not, sometimes that's pretty scary. We've planted into 5-foot high rye the last couple of years and had success. Now I'm not naive enough to think that it's not the weather that we've had. We've had a lot of rainfall after planting to keep things, going for us. But I like that setup, but I want to be able to get that rye on the ground after planting. I think that's one downfall of doing that is we spray it after planting and it stays up, basically all year round. And that corn is having to, find the sunlight through there, and it gets a little bit leggy. And if we do run into a dry spell, I think it hurts us because that cover crop's not down on the ground. So yes, like to plant green.
Okay. Jason?
Yeah, so to expand on that, I guess we plant green, but we don't like to plant green going to corn. Beans, we don't have any trouble with that at all, and really probably prefer to plant green than try and terminate it. But corn, we do try to terminate before we plant, before it gets too big, because we've had issues in the past. I know a lot of people have had success with it, but we've kind of struggled with it. But even on the bean side, as Aaron was talking about, having trouble in corn about that rye standing, we've even had a little issue in beans with it standing all year long, because then you go to harvest and it's still there. Not only is it more going through the machine, but also we kind of see that big areas where it's still standing, there's a slight reduction in yield. So we're going to try to come up with a better way to lay that rye down at planting, so that way we don't have those issues.
Okay. Aaron, you talked about your new toolbar. You want to give us a little more insight on what that is and what's your approach going to be to utilize that in hopes to get more cover crop applied than the coming year?
Yeah, so it's a Unverfirth rolling harrow. It's got a double basket on it. And, you know, I talked to a lot of people that say that that's going to work for me, that it has the seeder box on it right in front of the harrows, drops the seed out, and then just gets a little bit of light. I don't want to say incorporation, but you know what I mean. It's getting just enough disturbance to be able to get that seed in contact with the soil, especially after corn. I have not had success getting cover crops after corn. Just again, a two-man operation, it just takes us too long. So I can go faster with it. That's my biggest goal, is to get the seed out there quicker. The secondary goal of that piece of equipment, to Jason's point, and to what I said earlier, is with the basket, what I'm going to try to do is roll that cover crop in the spring, you know, after planting and spraying, and just come across it and roll it down and see if I can get it down on the ground as a mat to take advantage of that benefit of the moisture retention, having that mat on the ground. So that's my big goal with that piece of equipment. I guess everything I've heard from other experts is it should work. We'll see.
Okay, thank you. Jack, you represent a more of a minority group of speakers that we've had in the past in the fact that you have a swine unit with 100 sows. You know, my take on that would be that you're generating a decent amount of manure. Do you want to kind of share how your manure management program is helping you in your soil health goals?
Well, it's interesting. It's basically, we're using it as a nutrient source more than anything else. And because we're 100% no-till, we need to get it applied in such a way as we can continue to no-till and still try to get the manure below the surface. And fortunately, we've got an applicator here in the area who does a really good job with a drag line, and his shovels can get it down and still leave the surface. So come spring, we can no-till across it. We only have the sows here on this farm, but don't finish the pigs here at this particular location. So, and everything goes as a liquid manure system into a lagoon, and we pump out of that. We were set up to do finish hogs that way, and now we're doing sows that way using the same facilities. So it provides most of our P and K that we need on the particular fields that it gets applied to, plus a bit of nitrogen. Because we're in a lagoon, the nitrogen level is pretty low, so we have to add that, as versus pulling it directly out from underneath a barn where the nitrogen level generally is pretty good.
And you're applying that what time of year?
Usually we try to get it done in the fall, and we will be this year putting some on in the spring ahead of corn, because I have a source of manure from a barn nearby that we'll be pulling directly out of the pit for that one. That'll be tanked on, again, injected by the same guy, and we'll be no-tilling corn into that this spring on about 65 acres.
Okay, certainly an advantage to take advantage of those nutrients when our input costs on the fertilizer side are at such levels that they are. So Taylor, I've seen a couple things pop up in chat. We got any questions there you want to share?
Yes, we have a couple of questions. The first question is, would you share more about why you choose to farm the way that you do? So why is that important to you, and why is soil health important to you and your farm?
Okay. Did all three of you understand that question? Okay. And Jack, we'll go ahead and start with you to answer that.
Well, I got concerned, particularly on the mountain farm I mentioned earlier. We had some erosion issues there on that. We got some slopes that are 6 to 12 on that farm. We had erosion issues, and I was concerned out here in the valley. We've got a well field for the city of Urbana right behind us. within 100 yards of one of my fields. And so I'm concerned about nutrient loss headed into the groundwater supply. So those are two reasons I kind of got started in it. And then I ended up finding out we were getting some health benefits from the soil in terms of the structure, in terms of organic matter, in terms of those nutrients being recycled that was really helping us out. So I kind of grew into it, starting with one problem and finding we had some benefits that we could take advantage of as we went along. So over the last 10 years, we've done a lot of changes in order to take advantage of the soil health situation that we were starting to create.
Okay. Aaron, how about you next?
So I worked for soil and water conservation in a couple different counties for 10 years. And so I had that, I guess, before I started farming, full time. So, or not full time, but part time. And so I kind of had that background of going to the meetings that, I would assume a lot of us have gone to over the years of soil health trainings and listening to Ray Archuleta and that kind of passion. And then, so when we took over our farm where I live and had the opportunity to start farming, I guess I always said that I just kind of went into it being naive, that I never had the bad experiences that some farmers in the past have had, where they've had a failure of crops and things that they've tried. So I just went in head first and said, this is the way that I would like to farm, because I see all the benefits from all these meetings and talking to other farmers and the experts. Another experience that kind of shaped me was on our farm here. We kind of, I don't know, it's windy to me. And one day in the middle of winter, the side of my house was painted brown from the dirt blowing off the field. And that kind of just, I guess, cemented it to me that I can't leave this field uncovered. I can't watch my soil go down the stream anymore. So I've said it 100 times on every meeting that I've been on. You have to want to do this. If you don't have that kind of gut desire to do it, that, if you get a little bit wishy-washy or squeamish on, cover crops and things like that, it's pretty easy to just go back to the way you were doing it before. So.
Great comment there. Great comment on wanting or the desire. I like that comment. Jason, how about yourself on that question?
Well, I would definitely agree with Aaron. You got to want to do it because it's a little more challenging at times. But for me, I guess why I do it is I was lucky enough to take over some ground that had been no-till cover crop for like 15 plus years before me. And so I saw kind of the benefits that they had and the facts that, we already had pretty good soil structure in these areas that maybe we shouldn't have because the soils weren't that great. And some of the benefits that were already there, and I didn't want to, go backwards. So with having a good mentor, I was able to jump into it and just kind of keep it going. And hopefully I'm continuing to improve it.
Okay. Taylor, what's the next question?
What information helped you or would help you feel comfortable experimenting with cover crop species besides rye?
Jason, I'll lead off with you.
So I've got some neighbors that cover crop and so that's kind of helped me get going, but then experimenting, I guess I did branch out a little bit from what they'd done in the past and done some things they hadn't. It was a lot of just talking to people and trying to match up mixes that I thought that I could manage well. Like the crimson clover, I threw that in there last year. It was easy to manage. It was a little bit nerve-wracking when I had that mat in the spring, but went ahead and planted through it because that's what people in the past said would work. And it was a perfect stand of beans, had no issue. I intended to actually try to plant that farm to corn. It didn't work out. It didn't dry off in time. So like I said, I went ahead and no-tilled beans into it. Those I talked to thought it would work. The mat was very thick, but it did work, and it was a great stand.
To add to that then, Jason, before I forget it, how did that mat help you in weed control?
Yeah, it wasn't, we did use residuals on that farm. We always do use residuals. But coming back, I believe all I had to put on was just a shot of Roundup to control it, because I had some grass come through it. But as far as broadleafs, I think that was one of them we didn't hardly have any broadleafs at all. The beans looked good all summer. I was a little worried about what the yield would be like on them. Wasn't sure how that cover crop or that crimson would affect it. Like I said, it looked like they potted well. And when we cut them, they were very good beans. I was very pleased.
Okay. Aaron, you remember the original question?
Yep.
Okay.
So
how about you, Dunn?
Yeah, I do use, if we have wheat in the rotation, I'll put out a 5-6 way mix. I have experimented with that in the past. Like I said, we don't put out as much wheat anymore. Before it was $8 wheat, it wasn't as profitable. So we kind of took that out of the rotation. But I predominantly use cereal rye just because it's the thing that can grow easy in our current timing. We've used some oats after beans, oats and radish, and had good luck with that. I mean, oats will grow if the timing's right. This year we actually did blew in some cover crops, a 5-way mix into standing corn in June as an experiment, just to see if we could get something out earlier. So I'm definitely willing to try it, but it's gotta grow too. So that little experiment this year didn't work for probably a variety of reasons, but yeah, I'll try anything.
Okay, Jack, how about yourself?
Well, we've got 120 acres of small grains, so we're doing a mix on them, usually trying to get it planted early August. 3-way mix that we've used is oats, radish, crimson clover. We're going to corn the next year, so one of the things we want to do is kick up the nitrogen. Therefore, we can kind of get to the point where, as if we had beans supplying a portion of the nitrogen, the clover will do that. We're using the oats, just a different root system, better nutrition for the microbes, keep them working on the organic matter thing. And then we like the radish as a penetrator to try to improve our soil structure, mainly in terms of getting rid of things like hardpan that we may have that are created by probably 100 years of the moldboard plow on all of our farms.
You mentioned that you are trying to capture some nitrogen. Would you be willing to share kind of what your target is on your nitrogen credit you're giving yourself for that mix?
Generally after wheat or rye, either one, we're using about the same as we get from soybeans, about 30 pounds actual in supplying. So we want a total of 210 available to the corn crop to try to be bumping against 200 bushel corn. So that puts us down to 180. We have to supply extra. The other thing, by planting green and putting all this mat down there that you guys were mentioning is we've got to have some nitrogen early for the corn. So we changed our application process. We normally did a weed and feed with 28 and our chemicals early at about 10 gallons of 28. Now we're applying about 150 pounds of urea, which bumps us up into the 50-60 pounds of nitrogen early, and then taking that out of our side dress application that we do later on in the season. So our nitrogen rate is the same. It's just a matter of applying and getting it so we can get through that early growth stress that the corn might have by not having enough nitrogen early.
And part of that reason is you've got to fuel the decomposition process without it deleting the available nitrogen for the crop, correct?
Yeah, it's the carbon nitrogen thing. The ratio is just trying to get it set up so we can get that stuff broken down. And there's been some advantages of having that large mat there in the weed control side. We use a residual early, but we did not have to post our corn crop this past year where we did that full crop, because with the mat just basically kept everything under control.
Okay. Taylor, how about another question? See, a couple more have come in.
Yes. So some cover crops can be a host for pests and pathogens for your grain crop. What particular thing made you pick the cover crops that you're using?
Jack, I'll start with you.
Well, we use a lot of rye and wheat combination on everything else, and kind of similar to the other guys. It's something we can do. We can get it done fast, and it'll grow even in weather that's not exactly the best as we get into the colder season. We bought a spreader, a precision spreader, a few years ago, and we can run 90 feet at 12 miles an hour, so we can do 60 acres an hour, which really lets us get across the bean stubble and the corn stalks rapidly as soon as we can get harvest done. As far as the pests are concerned, we've not noticed any big difference. There's some people talk about slugs, but we haven't seen that any worse than what we had in our regular no-till without the cover crops. I haven't really seen insect issues or disease issues, either one.
Okay, Aaron?
Yeah, my biggest issues was slugs this past year, maybe the past 2 years. Maybe like a lot of people, I can't say that it was cover crop driven. It might be that no-till situation where we have a lot of residue left over as well. So, you know, I'm not necessarily selecting cover crops for the pests that potentially are out there. I think if you kind of improve the whole system long-term, you won't have those issues, or you'll be a little more resilient to be able to come through that. Now the slugs, they wiped me out on one field this year pretty good. So I'm just looking at seed selection for next year to make sure that seed gets up out of the ground quickly on beans. That seemed to be my problem this year, is that we planted, looked like a good seed bed, everything was good, but that seed just didn't come up quick enough, or didn't grow, vigorously enough, and those slugs just wipe it out.
Okay, Jason?
Yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot to add about that. We haven't seen a lot of pest issues because of cover, and weren't selecting to for pests other than rye. We've seen benefit of reducing mare's tail. Like Aaron said, there is a slug issue. We've only experienced it here and there. I think it was 18. We had a little bit of slug damage, but it wasn't even enough to warrant replant or anything. So far we've not had those issues.
Yeah, I think this was a year that we just had those hot spots, and we've seen that over the years. For whatever reason, slugs can be a little bit bigger issue. I've got some farming friends out in Maryland. The slugs were so bad late in the season that their entire top of their corn head was covered in slugs when they were harvesting corn, if you can imagine that. So if you want to see something really ugly, I can send you a picture. They were much larger than we would normally anticipate, but I think it was just a year. And, some soil health or cover crop folks say that, over time they do reduce some of that. But I think, again, everything's a cycle, and slugs this year seem to be one of those items that one neighbor could have them and the other neighbor didn't have any problems. So it's just a practice that we've got to be aware of and scout for, so that we can put some best management practices in place to get it stopped or to try and keep it from happening again. Jack, I wanted to ask you a question. You made the comment in terms of one of the reasons you were doing this, you were starting to see the benefit of organic matter and how it related to your soil health benefits. What gave you the indications that you were seeing those soil health benefits? What were the measures, or what were you looking at to identify that?
Well, one of the big things is actually measuring OM, and we soil test. We use half-acre grids, and we test every 4 years, and so we can get this thing narrowed down to specific areas and do some targeting of exactly how we want to manage those areas. And we've managed over time to improve since 2012 our organic matter about 1 to 1.25%. Most of our fields are in the 3.5 to 4.5 range. Got one field that's in the 7 range. The other thing we see out here in the gravelly bottom ground that I farmed the 500 acres is that increased organic matter has helped us with our water management. We don't lose as much during the season because we hold it better. And then we've got that cover on top to kind of keep the evaporation from happening. And then we can also use it to manage our planting a little bit because we can terminate the cover crop to handle what the planting season gives us. If it's dry, we can terminate early. If it's going to be wet, we can terminate right up at the time and let that stuff pull water out of the soil in order to get it into plants rather than on the planter colders. So those are some of the things we've looked at. Organic matter is one of the big ones, and then we kind of see some benefit of the additional nutrients that the organic matter can make available to plants.
Jason, I'll ask you a little different version of the same question. Knowing who your predecessor was, since we're both in Clinton County, since you've taken over that property that had a long history of cover cropping, do you see continued improvement in soil health, or is it kind of a status quo?
No, I think we are seeing continuous improvement, mainly probably on the structure side. Some sloped areas that maybe have always been a little rough, and continuing to cover crop them, it seems like they're continuing to get a little better on the structure side. And that's really what I guess I like the best about the whole situation is, like this spring, it was a wet area, or it was wet, went to plant where it was green and had good cover. I was able to close the row pretty well. Where the cover was light, wasn't able to close it as well. And I benefit that towards that. We've got good soil structure that's been building for quite a while.
Okay. Aaron, you want to add anything to those other two's comments?
Yeah, I've seen a pretty good improvement of organic matter on my farm. Like I said, it's been about 10 years of consistent no-till and mostly cover crops over those 10 years. That first round of sampling probably saw a 1% increase. Now, maybe that wasn't obviously not sustainable at that level, but it, kind of had that big rush to improving soils. A couple years ago on this farm, when it was the really wet spring, I can't remember what year that was. We were planting in June into a cover crop, and that my farm was so much different than our other farms that were, your traditional vertical tillage type farms, that everybody had a crust of, 2, 3, 4 inches of crust that they were having to break open again to try to get seeded. And we did not have that. The soil was very mellow. Now we had planter issues on that year that I think impacted closing the trench, but there was just a drastic difference between those two types of operations.
Okay, Taylor, what's next?
What were your biggest challenges when getting started with cover crops and soil health practices?
Aaron, I'll start with you.
What was the second part of that question?
Your biggest challenges with getting started with cover crops and soil health practices.
Okay. Like I said, I went into it thinking this is what I'm going to do. So I mean, challenges, yes. Time is always a challenge for us, as I've mentioned a couple times. I farmed with my father-in-law when I started. He was a little more skeptical. So he would be, you sure you want to do that? But gosh, other than that, I just kind of keep my head down and keep going.
Jason?
Yeah, I guess like I said before, I was fortunate enough to have a mentor that was already doing some of it, and some neighbors that have been doing it for a while. So, but I could see the challenge of just jumping in without having anybody. We've had neighbors that have asked a lot of questions and have started doing some now over the years. So hopefully we've been able to, help them guys along to some of the mistakes that's been made in the past. So I could see where there's that challenge of jumping in.
Jack?
Well, I think we started by putting on some annual ryegrass by airplane and to see what would happen. And, you know, kind of the early September thing. And we got really good stand on the sides of the hill facing the sun. On the sides of the hill not facing the sun, it wasn't very good. And so we began learning about, you know, well, what can we use? How can we apply it? What's going to be successful? And kind of a hit and miss thing for quite a while until we finally began to get some things working on a regular basis. So we started with, you know, like 50 acres and then just gradually grew from there. So it's kind of start small, get your feet wet and be committed to it.
Great comment. How about another question?
Could I add to that?
Yes,
quick?
Go ahead, Aaron. Absolutely.
I think that's a good comment by Jack. I started with 80 acres. So it was, I wouldn't say easy. I'm finding now as we've expanded and taken over the rest of the family farm that it's a lot harder to get across, you know, 300 acres or, you know, 800 acres efficiently. So I would agree. Start small. Don't try to do 1,000 acres in the first year because you'll fail miserably and then you'll be never doing it again.
Okay, Taylor, someone raised their hand, but I didn't catch the name. If you want to put that question in the chat box, please do so, because you won't be able to ask your question out loud. So
the next question is, have any of you used the NRCS programs to assist with funding cover crops? And have you looked into the carbon market companies?
Jason, you want to start?
So I have applied for funding through NRCS and through EQIP and have actually not been able to get it for the last, I think it's been 3 years I've been applying. So I've also looked at CSP because that's another way of getting funding for cover crop. May go that route in the future. As far as the carbon market goes, yeah, I've looked at it. Not been terribly interested yet. Trying to see how it all plays out before I commit to something. Maybe it's the right move, maybe it's the wrong move. I don't know. I guess time will tell, but I just haven't committed to anything at this time.
How about you, Aaron?
I typically did not do any programs. This past year, we had a special sign up of our little sub watershed here in Shelby County. I did sign up for that. Just kind of well, you know, I guess if the pot of money is available, I'll take advantage. And it was all corn here, so I didn't have a good opportunity to get it out. Didn't have good success, so I didn't get that payment. We also are eligible for the H2 Ohio program here in Shelby County, and signed up for that. But I don't think I'm going to follow through with it. Again, just timing issues. Just couldn't get things accomplished. So I think for me, long term, I'm probably not going to continue on with cost share programs. Maybe I'm leaving money on the table, but I'm going to do it anyways. So I don't need that extra incentive. So that's just my own personal mentality on it. I'm just going to keep going.
Jack, how about you?
We got involved in CSP several years ago, primarily because it would help us to cover some stuff we were already doing. We'd been no-tilling for a long time, and so we were eligible and had the enhancements to do each year, which helped us to build into the full 100% cover crops. We've now about to the point of graduating from that because our enhancements now that were available to us are not as lucrative, I guess, as what the CSP had been previously because we've already been in it. As far as the carbon credits, best I can see, I'm not eligible because I've been doing this a long time, and no-till is the big thing to get into that. And until they decide that you got to be new or don't have to be new anymore to take advantage of it, we probably won't be looking at it.
A question I'm going to steal from you, Taylor, looking at the chat here, just real quick, kind of moving ahead of a couple questions. As you work with your seed dealers, a question that came up, are there breeding programs in progress to improve the characteristics of current varieties now on the market? So I guess my question is, as you talk with your dealers, you know, what's the story they're talking to you about in terms of improving the quality of cover crop seed and what you're capable of using? Aaron, you look perplexed a little bit with that. I'll start with you.
Yeah, I deal with Greg McGlinch down in Darke County quite a bit on our seed. He would be a much better person to answer that question. I have not had those conversations, to be honest.
Okay, Jason?
Yeah, I don't think I've really had that conversation either. You know, every once in a while they will say, well, this rye came from this area and is taller or is, you know, things like that. But I don't think I've heard any of them that's selling the seed to say that there's a push towards some type of improvement or anything like that at this time.
Jack, how about yourself?
I'm not sure which direction the question is going. I took it to mean the varieties of the cash crops were growing. And to me, particularly in corn, the biggest thing is emergence. You got to be able to get up through everything. And we used to have a problem with corn after wheat that sometimes the corn didn't emerge very well. And I think the seed companies have done a really tremendous job of getting emergence taken care of with almost any corn variety you would get at this point. I don't see any difference in terms of the cover crop viability and any change there.
Yeah, I think the key to, you know, if you're a novice in this, not all cover crop seed is created equal. So make sure that you're utilizing seed that's for our region of the United States. There's lots of vendors that are on the web, and they don't all fit our grow zones. So I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind. And then I think the other biggest thing that I see, not so much in research, but in trial and error by many of you that are utilizing cover crops to improve soil health, is finding that right combination of plant material that we can incorporate as a group of plants, you know. So like in Jack's case, where he's utilizing 2 or 3 different kinds of cover crops in a mix. And so I think there's lots of things we're learning, but there again, I think it's one of those things, be cautious. What works for one person may not work on you. So try some of those mixes in a small capacity and see if they're going to work before you just go 100% out there. Conrad said, I should have been more clear. I did mean improvement of agronomic characteristics of cover crop seed. So I think we addressed that pretty well there. A question I have in terms of your work, since most of you have had several years now under your belt, you know, how has your soil health work on your farm paid off? You know, is it just drainage? Is it actual measured soil health? Are any of you actually pulling some samples for soil health? Is it tilth? You know, is it nutrient retention, yield? You know, what's that payoff that you're identifying with from your hard work? Jason, I'll start with you.
So I do pull some soil health tests and send them off. I haven't seen a huge, you know, they kind of send you back like the scale of where you're at. I don't really think I've really moved that a lot lately. But I come back to the structure side and being able to plant when maybe I wouldn't be able to plant if the ground had been bare and things like that. And that's obviously a huge payoff, because like this spring, I probably would have been another, you know, a couple of weeks out by the time it started raining again to get a farm planted, and that would have definitely hurt my yield. So that's the payoff I see is probably I'm getting paid back and being able to maybe plant some areas a little sooner, and then having, like I said, having better structure to be able to do that.
Okay, Jack.
Well, we've been doing some testing probably the last 4 years. We've done several different tests. We did the Cornell test 4 years ago. We did 2 years of the Haney test. And then we did the OSU test this past spring. Don't have any results back from that. I guess there was some sort of a mechanical or other kind of failure to get those results back in. But we are all coming out in the optimal areas of those soil health tests that cover a lot of different things. One of the big advantages I've seen up here in our area where we're really drought prone, if a dry July comes along in the corn crop or dry August in the bean crop, is this cover crops with the stuff that's left on the surface seems to be getting us an extra day or two before I see the stress from dry weather like we had in July of 19 and again in July and August of 20. And our yields seem to be picking up, 4, 5, 6 bushel to acre, probably over what I'm seeing is going on in the neighbors. So the water management thing is one of the things that happen. We have no tile, by the way. We don't need it. We got natural drainage that takes all the water away we can get.
Okay, Aaron, how about yourself?
Yeah, I would agree with Jack on the water management side of things. That's probably the biggest thing that I've noticed is just the crops being more resilient during those hot summer months. I think my yields have held in there pretty close to the neighbors that are doing different, management practices, tillage practices. But, when it's that soil structure is so much better, like I mentioned earlier, when we're planting, we don't have that crust. We can get on the ground easier. My agronomist has told me a couple of years ago when we first started, he could tell a difference of getting the probe in the ground. It was definitely much easier to push in the ground. So I'll take that as a win. The ground just looks different, smells different. I did the soil health test before I started, but to be honest, I have not come back and done it again. I probably should do that.
Okay, Taylor, any questions we missed there?
I believe you've answered the ones that we've had so far.
Okay, so another question that I have, and Aaron, you've kind of already alluded to it, that you're utilizing a new toolbar. Jack, we'll start with you. Are you looking at incorporating any new technology to improve your application of cover crop seed during the growing season?
Well, one of the big things we did a few years ago was get that spreader that I had mentioned earlier, because the deal of getting everything seeded after harvest on beans and corn so that you still get some growth in the fall is pretty important. So one of the things we did is use that spreader that we can get across the field pretty quickly. Our problem, like everybody else has mentioned, is getting the labor. Somebody's got to operate that thing while the harvest is going on in order to have it happen. And that kind of comes to my role. I got my guy, Zach, who takes care of the harvest stuff. And so I fill in on some of those other things. I'm a lot older than these other two guys that are on this panel, so I don't do quite as much of that physical work as perhaps I used to. And the other thing we're doing is we've got the rolling basket thing, started that last year to try to intended to do more crimping of the crop and try to do some non-chemical termination. That's one of the two key issues to me on selecting your varieties is one, what do you want to accomplish? And the second one is how are you going to get rid of it so you can still have your cash crop?
Jason, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it before about having, and Aaron did too, about having that rye still standing. And so trying to come up with a better way of doing that. I plant with a 15-inch row, no-till planter. Was planting cover and still planting cover on a 15-inch row spacing as well. So originally we thought, well, this is going to work really nice. I'm going to plant the cover on RTK and I'm going to plant the beans back through them with RTK. So I'll plant right in between and this will work great. And it does actually work well and it covers well. But then you get those areas where the rye got taller and it stands and it, it is affecting the beans later in the season. And then of course at harvest. So trying to come up with a way to do that differently, maybe drag something behind the planter just to knock it down a little bit. I would love to do a rolling basket, but that's another pass. And like they said, with limited help, that's a challenge, trying to get across the field to do that too. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to try to come up with something different on how to do that.
Okay, Taylor, is there another question there?
No, it's just thank you all, or a thank you to the panelists. Thank you for sharing about your experiences.
Okay. Any other questions? We're actually getting close to the end of our hour, and we still have a few housekeeping items to share yet, but any other last comments that the three of you would like to share? Aaron, I'll start with you.
Put me on the spot to come up with it on the fly here. I would go back to what I said earlier, that, you have to want to do soil health practices. Everybody's getting bigger. Their farming operations are getting bigger. I work in like I said earlier, the soil and water world. I work in water quality with our demonstration farm project. So I see both sides of farming. I see the economic side of trying to get bigger and, being able to pay the cash rent and land prices, and you don't want that extra risk of soil health. Then I also see the public side of public perception, where they're going to start putting pressure on us to do more of these practices, and you better get comfortable doing them. So I see it on both sides, but I don't see us going back to the moldboard plow anytime soon in that way of farming. So I think, if you're kind of on the fence of doing it, start small and get your feet wet and make your mistakes at a small scale so that it doesn't ruin a year for you on the whole farm.
Okay, Jason.
Yeah, so I think Aaron and Jack both said a few times, start small, pick a farm that's where nobody can see it if you're worried about it, and do a trial and see how you get along with it. And then, like for me, and it's been talking to neighbors that were doing it before me, or my mentor that, had already been doing it for, 15 years and learning from what they've done. So, talking to those farmers that are on similar soil types and the success that they've had and how they've done it. And I think most people that are cover cropping are probably going to be pretty quick to share what they're doing and how they've done it, and probably willing to help you out.
Okay, how about you, Jack?
Philosophically, that's where we're at now, right? I'm looking at soil resilience. I mean, we beat up this soil in all kinds of different ways, going over it when we probably ought not to in order to get the job done. And we need to have our soil be as resilient as possible in order to come back and to make up for that sort of thing and still give us a crop that we can make a living off of. And then we got the whole thing. I think Farm Journal's been doing a good job with that triangle in the middle of the three circles. We've got to make a profit. We've got to protect the environment, protect our soil quality, and we've also got to kind of meet the challenges of what those people outside of the industry think we ought to be doing. And there's a center piece of that pie that we need to, kind of our sweet spot that we need to be hitting, and we got to keep looking at that and see how we might get that accomplished.